thank you for joining us today for Decisive Disaster Response. I'm excited for us to learn how to prepare for the future while thinking about building community resiliency. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce our speakers for the conversation today. First, Sarah Groninger, as Director of Partnership Development. Oops, I think I'm supposed to forward the slides. Oh, Matt, you did it for me. Thank you. Thank you. Teamwork makes the dream work. As Director of Partnership Development at Global Giving, Sarah cultivates relationships with corporate and institutional partners to drive funding to community-led organizations. Sarah helps partners design grant-making, employee giving, and disaster relief programs. Our second speaker, Jessica Leary, Global Community Relations Senior Manager at Ball Corporation, is a social impact professional with expertise in grant-making, strategic planning, communications, stakeholder engagement. Such a long list, project management, and community outreach. We're really happy to have her here today. Headquartered near Denver, Ball is committed to making communities thrive by balancing the economic, environmental, and social impacts of everything they do. As a reminder, all workshops will be recorded and resources mentioned will be available after the summit for all attendees. We'll save some time at the end for discussion and audience Q&A, so jot down inspiring thoughts as you go. Don't forget to share what you're learning, tag BCivic, hashtag BCivic Summit. And now for the main event, I'd like to welcome Sarah and Jessica.
Hello, how's everyone doing? Is lunch digesting? Have we hit the lull? And I understand there's also a snack break after this, so we are like sandwiched perfectly between food, which is typically how I like to do my sessions, right? Always thinking ahead about what I'm eating next. It's lovely to be with you here today. My name is Sarah Groninger. I am with Global Giving. I have the opportunity to work with really cool partners to help them give philanthropically all over the globe. We are here to talk about Decisive Disaster Response. Say that 3 times fast, I dare you. It is a tongue twister. I am joined by my colleague here, Jessica. I'll let her introduce herself in Ball Corporation.
All right, okay, good. So hi, I'm Jessica Leary with Ball Corporation. So we are your leading supplier of aluminum products. So your cans, cups, and bottles. So we are here making a sustainable and innovative product to help our customers, consumers, everyone make a more sustainable choice. We've been working with Global Giving since 2022. And it has been amazing. We are a global company, so we are located in over 30 countries with over 25,000 employees.
Wow, quite a footprint. Awesome. So as you heard, I'll mention again, Global Giving is a nonprofit. We're based in Washington, D.C. Shout out to ServPro. We have offices in the UK as well as in China. And we make it possible for individuals, for companies, for their employees to give seamlessly and safely to vetted nonprofits all over the globe, because it is our mission to transform aid and philanthropy to accelerate community-led change. Oopsies. I'm driving 2 screens here. Let's see how that works. A little high-level overview of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit. We have heard a lot about disaster response and how to plan for unplanned moments, right? This is variations on a theme. So you might pick up a few things that you heard earlier today that really align with what we're going to talk about today. But I'm going to set the stage. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's happening in disaster relief and the sector writ large. Jessica's going to really highlight the incredible work she and Ball are doing to respond to disasters all over the globe. We have some discussion questions for you. So hopefully with this size group, we can be really engaged and animated and fight off that late lunch lull. And then we're going to give you some tools to help you craft your steps and takeaways. So does that sound good for everyone? Awesome, thrilled. Okay, it's a small group. I'm always keen to know who's in the room. So I'm curious if anyone wants to share who they are, maybe the name, pronoun, who their employer is, the most recent disaster your company responded to, perhaps maybe who traveled the farthest to get here. Any takers? Yes.
Hi, my name is Kristen St. Louis, pronoun she, her. Work for United Airlines.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
Is figuring out how to work in Mexico, understanding what the needs are, and learning from taking care of. And then I am from Chicago.
Awesome. I'm also from the Northwest, so shout out Chicago. Kristen, nice to see you. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm Veronica Hayden, work for severity, as a commercial estate company. The most recent disaster was the war in Israel. We got really about 2 million employees.
Wow.
The decision was prompted because of our employees there, specifically on the side of responding to disasters, because there's so many.
Yeah.
All around the country. It's been challenging because it's not the earthquake, hurricane, that this event happens and then it's just recovery. This is ongoing development situation. So I'm just looking to learn more about how many other companies are dealing with that or using frameworks in place.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, with these humanitarian crises, the tail on them and the effects are just feels never ending. Anyone else? One last person? Yes, please.
My name is Emma. I'm Chief River Analysis with Fidelity Investments. And I would say our most recent one was the Lahaina fires on Maui. And we as Fidelity are very conservative in what we choose to respond to, which is something I personally would like to see us shift a little bit in. But that was the first one. Something I'm hoping to get out of this session is sort of, how do we push companies to be a little bit more vocal in this space and be able to take a risk that still feels safe to them. And I just moved to Denver last weekend.
Congratulations. How exciting. Awesome. Well, it sounds like we've got a great group of folks who have some experience working in the space, who are looking to develop a few more tools or some best practices, and hopefully you'll leave here today with just that. So we'll dive on in. I'm going to share a few things that we know. We know that it is absolutely possible to plan for the unpredictable but inevitable disaster event, right? Because we know these things are going to happen. It is also possible that your strategic corporate response can better meet the needs of your global community, right? Wherever you have employees, suppliers, business partners, having a strategic response will enable that. We also know that prepping your priorities and having decision processes, right? Mark, in our last session, if you attended his session, talked a lot about having tools to help plan for these moments, right? So we know that if we have these tools available, it's going to enable a faster and more equitable response every single time, okay? We also know that okay, well that says disasters are on the rise, fueled in part by climate change, which we know they are increasing with severity and frequency all over the globe, right? There used to be a wildfire season in California and other places. It is now wildfires all the time because that's just the world we live in, right? The hurricane season used to start in June. It's starting earlier and lasting longer, right? So these events are on the rise, but budgets are not. Headcount is not. So you all have to do more and respond to more with fewer resources. And that's really hard, right? This graph, it's kind of small print, but it highlights the percentage of billion-dollar disaster events between 1980 and 2022 at the time year to date. Obviously, it was halfway through the year. Visually, it's staggering, right? So 42% of those billion-dollar natural disaster events have occurred in the last decade alone, right? So these things are happening. We've got data. We know it's happening. I'm going to share some trends we don't love. Every year, $20 to $30 billion, billion with a B, is devoted to international humanitarian assistance. Yet only 2% actually reaches the local community. Those local change makers, those local organizations who are on the front lines responding to those disasters, right? They're gonna be there when the event happens, and they're gonna be there long after the fact, long after the big white, humanitarian vans have rolled out, long after the news cycles and cameras have moved on to other things. But 98% is channeled to a small number of large nonprofit organizations. And the problem is, those nonprofit organizations have tighter and tighter restrictions on how that funding can be used. So when we really think about what a disaster looks like when it hits our local communities, right? You want the dollars you're donating, your company is allocating, to serve the needs and get to the ground. Right now, that's not happening. We also know that 5 times more is spent on emergency response versus preparedness and risk reduction. Okay, so emergency response is a storm hits, boots on the ground, we are saving lives, we are, addressing survivors' immediate needs. It's hygiene kits, it's water, it's food, it's meals, right? But we know, and we heard Mark talk about this in the last session, there's gonna be things that come next. How can we plan for that? How can we think about that? We also know that for every $1 invested in preparedness, saves $6 in recovery. Right? So there's an economic argument to be made about thinking about when and how and where we respond to disasters. Something else we know. 6 out of 10 risks over the next 10 years are environmental, right? We feel it all the time. I was in Denver a few weeks ago for ACCP. It was 85 degrees. I didn't pack for 85-degree weather in Denver in October. Turns out it's warmer in lots of places. We know that failure to mitigate climate change, natural disasters, and extreme weather impact our communities time and time again, right? But there's some good news here. There are a handful of things that we might recommend or offer as food for thought. Cash, not stuff. Unless, of course, you're United Airlines and you've got a fleet of airplane who can move cargo and really, bring resources to communities, right? Or, your other companies that have really incredible product to bring to bear on that community. But otherwise, cash, not stuff. Cash, because it's flexible, right? Survivors' needs change daily, right? Cash also helps to bolster the local economy because those organizations who are getting your cash donations are able to purchase things from other businesses that are also rooted in that community. So there is kind of this virtuous cycle of economic good that can happen when you give cash. And I'm sure we've all seen photos in the wake of a disaster event with warehouses filled with, puffy winter jackets when the folks, in Haiti, turns out don't really need your ski gear. Or perhaps they don't need your teddy bears, right? And all of those goods just get stuck at the border. They become a headache, it's expensive, and it's not actually addressing the needs, right? So cash goes faster and farther. And again, unless your company has unique logistics or product capability, I will always recommend cash. Virtual skilled volunteering. A lot of people want to help and want to mobilize their colleagues to respond. This is wonderful. I'd offer a few bits of advice here. It is really important to make sure that you are partnering with organizations that exist to mobilize volunteers. Because the last thing we want to do is slow down recovery and put more friction in the wheels when these organizations are trying to respond. So think about how you can leverage virtual skilled volunteering. Think about how you can reach out to organizations and really ask what they need, right? I mean, that's like a theme here, is really understanding who your partners are and what their needs are and how you can align your resources to do so, right? So sending a flood of unskilled volunteers to the field is not best practice for a multitude of reasons. And frankly, it's a big liability and a risk you don't want to touch. But virtual volunteering, even before disasters strike. Perhaps you live in a community that is going to get hit by wildfires, or communities that are prone to flooding, or we know Asia Pacific is constantly going to hit with typhoons, right, and cyclones. We know these things are true. So what can you do to mobilize your volunteers to help on the front end? Maybe it's having to help pack go bags or come up with evacuation plans, right? Thinking ahead about these inevitable, but unpredictable but inevitable events will just set everyone up for success. I mentioned this before, but I cannot beat this drum loud enough. The impact of climate change is real and really having a traumatic impact on the frequency and the severity of these natural disasters. There was a hurricane in Acapulco, a week ago, 2 weeks ago? It was the largest, strongest hurricane on record to make landfall in Mexico. And what was so striking about it is the fact that it came seemingly out of nowhere. It intensified so rapidly that even with evacuation plans, people were kind of caught flat-footed, right? Climate change is impacting this. So what can we do? We can invest in preparedness, right? Every $1 invested in preparedness saves $6 in recovery costs. That's a wild calculus right there, right? So we know that many companies are really starting to think about, okay, we want to respond when these events happen, surely, but what can we do on the front end? And how can we help to mitigate those impacts? Maybe it's planting oyster beds to fortify shorelines, right? Maybe it's thinking, if you're an urban planner or developer, maybe it's thinking about urban sprawl and how you can think about, am I just flattening everything to build a great big, suburb? Or is there a different way to think about building and the natural environment that will make it easier when there's, tons of rainfall, so these communities aren't likely to get flooded, right? The last thing I'll mention is vetting local partners, so that when these events strike, you have your partners ready to go, and they've been vetted so that you know that they're doing great, legitimate, incredible work. So it's just going to be turnkey, right? And those local partners, again, are the folks who have boots on the ground, who know their communities. It's where they live. It's where their kids go to school, right? It's where they work. They're there for the long haul. So really think about who you can partner with and how can you make sure that they're doing the work. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Jessica to talk about Ball.
Hello. Okay, so Jessica Leary with Ball Corporation. We're headquartered here in Broomfield. We have locations across 30 countries, over 100 of them. I'm going to just take you on a little journey to tell you how we started in disaster relief and then where we are today. So, like I said earlier, the challenge, right? We have 24,000 employees all across the globe. We are headquartered here in Denver. Our foundation is a US foundation, right? So getting funds over across the globe is difficult. So we went and partnered with Global Giving, which was a labor of love for poor Sarah. She was on the phone with me for a year. And basically said, hey, right now we're responding ad hoc. We don't have a succinct process to tell our leaders why we said yes and why we said no. So we came up together with a customized tool, a decision tool, so sort of like Mark's, how do you show up for social issues? The same type of framework, right? It allowed our leaders to say, this is where we're going and why, without having to sit down and say, okay, here's my lengthy 3-page email, here's all the vetting. Instead, he could say, hey, to my whole C-suite, this is what we're doing, this is why, we can get the money there tomorrow. Very quick. So, like I said, first, the issue was we were just responding ad hoc. We have a handful of partners here in the US who do an amazing, amazing job, but the footprint just wasn't reaching the majority, 85% of our employees. They were asking for help and we just weren't able to equitably show up for them. We couldn't specify the charities, right? So we couldn't comfortably and confidently tell our employees, this is the nonprofit it went to, this is the impact it had. We weren't able to do that. We could high level and show the impact, because our partners do a great job with their reports, but we couldn't explain why. So me coming to my CEO to say, hey, that was a great donation, this is what it did, I wasn't able to do that, so the confidence was lacking from them all the way to our level. So the now, we're faster. So first, I guess I'll go a step back. So together, we came up with a decision tree. So before, like we said, there was a wildfire season, there was a hurricane season. Now, it seems to be everything, right? We never responded historically to social issues or humanitarian. And the moment we inked our deal with Global Giving, the war in Ukraine happened, right? So our CEO was like, what are we doing? This is how much I want to give. And we were immediately got on the phone and was like, Sarah, Megan, we need some help. Can you give us some charities? Do we have a fund? Global Giving does an awesome job of putting together a fund. So what they'll do is they'll actually put out on their website for everyone, including our company partners, so that they've already vetted the charities. I can confidently say, this is going to a reputable charity. I can have the impact for you in the next month, 6 months, a year from now. So that continuous communication for my leaders is important, because that means I get more budget, right? I get more, we get a seat at the table. I think Mark said that, right? I think now what we've seen is those leaders, when something happens, like we had the fires, most recently the earthquake in Mexico, they're inviting us to the seat at the table to say, okay, now we have communications, we have risk, we have operations, and we have community, right? How are we making sure that our employees are being seen and heard, and also the communities where we have operations? So with that, we put together a scorecard, which is a snapshot for our facilities impacted and our leaders to say, this is, so global giving is great. They fill out the first three, the severity, where it is, how many people are impacted, and then we get to go to our actual locations impacted, which we have a radius of 50 miles. I mean, we had to narrow it down in scope because we can't, obviously respond and have a big impact for everything. So we had to have an answer and a no and a why. So we have this scorecard. It's amazing. If you guys are interested, please contact me and Sarah. They'd be happy to share. No, but I think what's great about it is it gives us just the fodder for us to say, hey, no, we can't respond to everything. If I have an employee come to me, just one or 100, or we can say, hey, it's not within the 50 miles, it's not within scope, but let us open up another opportunity for you, which is where we like to bring in our giving platform. We use a company called Benevity, which I'm sure a lot of people here probably have it. So what we'll do automatically when we respond or don't respond to a disaster through the foundation is we will open up a giving opportunity with those vetted organizations that Global Giving has already given us. So we know that we've, one, given from a foundation, if we can, and then our employees are also given the opportunity to give back as well. And we are matching it on our end, right? So they are feeling like they're empowered to do something regardless of where they stand on the situation, how they feel about it. We're giving them an opportunity, and we feel confident with those organizations. So what's next, and I think Sarah hit on this, right, is how do we move from being reactive to more proactive? And to be transparent with this group, our leaders are a little bit more hesitant. How do I define preparedness? How do we all define it? I mean, it varies. So I think that's a conversation we continue to have is, do we pick a select locations, right, who continuously are being beat up year after year? Do we start, where do we start? And so I think Global Giving has been really great in consulting us to say, hey, maybe we bite off a little bit. So the organizations that we've already supported, we check back with them at the end of the year to say, hey, how are you doing? Do you need more funding? And then from there, we can kind of help them and prepare. And then also with those organizations who are boots on the ground, they are there, they're helping those communities, and so we feel comfortable saying, hey, year after year, we need a little bit more for Global Giving because look at what they're doing, right? It used to be 1 or 2 disasters, now we are responding to 10, 12, all of them. And I think Lauren's here from our team, and we talk to our organizations, our regional leads, weekly, right? If something comes through from Global Giving to say, hey, we've pinged this, we think this is happening, we immediately go to our facilities to make them part of that solution. So now it's not just corporate saying, oh, we've given money here, maybe we saw it. They actually know the organizations, they see the impact, their employees know the organization, and they're able to amplify it through Benevity. So I will say though, it's been a journey for our leadership. I think before, community relations was a nice to have. We weren't actually asked, they were told, hey, this is what we're gonna do, and good luck, thank you for signing the check. Now it's, can you give me a recommendation? They trust us in the positions that we're put in for a reason, and I think all of us here have that voice to say it. It has taken a little bit. We've also had change in leadership. We have a new CHRO, a new CEO, and what's been nice is that trust, right? And I think especially from a global level, it's not just me sitting in Colorado telling them this is what we're giving to this organization. It's now my regional HR lead who sits in Luton, right, coming to us to say, hey, we have something that happened in the Czech Republic. Can you give us a recommendation on a nonprofit? We give it to them, and there's no questions, there's the background, and they feel confident in those decisions. So I think having those tools and those processes in place makes our jobs 100 times easier. And the guesswork for us, right? We don't have to, the risk mitigation, the brand awareness, we don't have to worry, well, I should, before I say anything. No, but I think it just gives us the confidence in our partners to say, we trust them, they've went through the red tape, these organizations have been vetted, and then when my audit team comes to me, when we were talking about the SEC filings, right? When they come to me to say, hey, can you please give me the report out, who is this organization? We have all their information. So I can't speak enough on it, and no, I was not paid to be here. They're just that great. I would highly, highly recommend talking with them if you guys have questions, because for a large organization like us, I am not an expert in what's happening across the globe, and I won't pretend to be, but what I do know is that I am able to come to my leadership team with a recommendation and feel confident in it. But yeah, so pass it back to you now.
Oh, we got two, we're dueling. You know, and I think what was really valuable from Global Giving's perspective in the Ball partnership is really spending a lot of time to think critically about what are your priorities? What do you care about, right? How do you think about responding to the needs of your employees and those operations and facilities all over the globe, right? And really getting laser focused on what kind of event? How close to our facility? What is the impact on our people, right? What resources can we bring to bear? And really crystallizing that so that it enabled a faster, more consistent response, right?
I would add too, the flexibility, right? I mean, so what's nice is the framework is adjusted. It's not gonna cover 100% of what does happen. And so I think being able to have that in flexing, I mean, obviously we all know if someone above us says we're gonna do this, well, we're gonna make it work, and we're gonna make sure that it's going to where it needs to go and why. But I think what's nice is the flexibility and being able to just ebb and flow as we see fit. And then each year, come down and have a program review and talk through it, which has been really great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Super, okay, so some strategic questions for you all, or things to think about. And this is similar to kind of the process that we facilitated with Ball, right? So what type of disaster events will your company respond to? How many of you know the answer to that question? Okay, great, that's awesome. Where in the world will your company respond? Okay. All-star student in the front row, obviously. Right, so do you know exactly where your people and operations are? Are you involving supply chain, business partners? How far down that chain are you gonna go, right? How will you assess the local needs and the communities impacted and identify the best ways to support? Do you have the mechanisms in place to do this? You know this, great, that's awesome. This piece is super, super important, so it's awesome that I saw like a very confident hand raise. And who needs to be part of your decision-making process, right? Who are the people that need to sign off on those decisions every single time? So that you know, you don't have to like, oh, well, last time we went to the comms team, but we also have to go to leadership, and well, we got to bring in our local team, you know, in the Czech Republic to make sure, like, every single time you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So knowing who needs to be part of that process and in identifying and making sure they know that they're involved, right, will really help to enable agile activation and enable that consistent response every single time. And those folks feel like they've got skin in the game, they've got a seat at the table, they care just as much as you do. And so that consistency and that repetition is really, really helpful. Other things to think about. Will you support all stages of disaster recovery? Right? We often think about the emergency response. There's an earthquake in Morocco. There's an invasion first in Israel, now in Gaza. There is, you know, a hurricane in Acapulco, flooding in Libya. You pick the country, there's a disaster, humanitarian crisis there. Are you responding to the emergency response, which looks like helping survivors, distributing food, water, hygiene supplies, setting up temporary shelter? Are you thinking about responding to the reconstruction and recovery phase of the disaster cycle, right? Because we know something's gonna happen next. What happens next? You've got these survivors, you've got these things, what are you gonna do about it, right? That looks like rebuilding schools, homes, roads, basic infrastructure, power, cleaning debris, creating jobs, getting people back to work, providing mental health services because folks have gone through traumatic events. And what can you do to support them and make sure they can land on their feet, right? Or maybe you might think about responding in the risk mitigation or preparedness cycle of disaster, right? That looks like planting trees, training first responders, creating preparedness plans, evacuation routes, go bags, investing in those local nonprofits who will be responding, investing in their capacity, making sure they have the resources so when these things happen, they're ready to go, right? So thinking about the different stages of the disaster cycle and what makes the most sense for you, right? It's also important to think about what preparedness means for companies, right? So it has to do with documenting your process, right? We've heard that a few times today. Really identifying your budget and key resources and making sure that's kind of set aside year over year. Right, and I think the interesting learning in the BALL program is that, we set up kind of funding thresholds based on looking at, I think in 2021 there were 230 disasters in 117 countries, and kind of did a crosswalk of like where BALL had facilities, like, okay, they're gonna respond to this many, and let's make sure that the budget available can respond to all of those needs, right? And at the end of the year, Jessica's point, you kind of sit back and said, okay, where did we respond? Did we use all of our budget? How can we adjust this? How can we think about really identifying different ways to leverage that budget and those resources so those communities have the resources, not just that one-time drop in the bucket, but over and over and over again, making sure that those communities know that you're committed, right? And lining up your partners. Maybe you're not necessarily gonna have a ton of cash to disperse to local communities, but maybe it's really important for you to think about supporting your employees. So maybe you want to have an employee assistance fund. So that might look like partnering with E for Relief. Great organization that does this very thing. If that's important to you and aligns with your values and what you as a company stand for, get that stuff set up ahead of time, right? Maybe you have a lot of really great product that makes sense in a wake of a disaster, but you need a distribution partner. Good 360. No one's better at it than they are, right? They have the mechanisms to take your product and get it to the communities and the organizations that need it. Maybe you have pro bono skills to leverage, right? Your employees are really engaged, they want to volunteer, they want to help. How can you tap and leverage that resource? Maybe that might look like pro bono disaster support, partnering with organizations like Taproot, headquartered in Chicago, and Pixar Global. So spending some time to critically think about who are your partners, and how, again, does that ladder to what your business stands for, your mission, and the impact that you want to have, right? I'm going to offer another case study. Cruise and rum. Has anyone had cruise and rum? Okay. Has anyone been to St. Croix? Or the US Virgin Islands? Okay. Does anyone recall what happened in 2017 and 2018? Can you tell me?
They had a huge oil spill.
There was an oil spill, yes. What else? Okay, not a pop quiz. There were pretty significant hurricanes, Irma and Maria. Well, that's, again, pick a day, pick a year, like a million events. It's hard to keep track. Wow, oh, these slides look so goofy up there. Sorry about that, folks. Hope you can follow along anyway. Crucian is a rum brand. They're owned by Beam Suntory. And Crucian rum was originally distilled on the island of St. Croix. Folks on St. Croix, I learned, are called Crucians. Fun fact. So for the first time, Crucian rum had a major disaster that impacted literally the heart of their brand and their company. Just wiped out St. Croix. And they wanted to do something, but they had no idea what to do because they're not in the business of disaster response. They're in the business of making spirits and making sure people can live a happy life, right? So they wanted to step up because this mattered. So they created the Island Spirit Fund. They wanted to awaken your island spirit, right? Which I kind of love the branding. But they really wanted to think about how they could leverage, what product did they have? They had rum. How could they leverage that product to respond to the hurricanes? Well, they could create a cause marketing program where every $1 per case sold of rum went to a fund to respond to rebuilding St. Croix and other islands in the USVI that were also impacted. And what I think is so interesting is not only did they kind of pony up and say, okay, we have a brand to leverage, we can do something here, they also got their distribution partners involved and said, hey, do you want to join us on this journey, right? And they did. And they leveraged their supply chain network and their distribution partners to also donate to the Island Spirit Fund. Additionally, they also set aside part of their philanthropic budget to plan for the inevitable events because they want to continue rebuilding. The program's been around for 5 years. It's raised almost $6 million and supported long-term community partners that are still rebuilding these islands because no one's paying attention to them. This was, 6 years ago. Who's thinking about it, right? We've got wars on the brain. We've got other hurricanes, other mudslides, but it is important for Crucian to continue showing up. But they know that the unpredictable, inevitable event's gonna happen, and they wanna support the communities where their people live and work. So they allocated part of their budget to the unpredictable events that aren't immediately on the radar screen, right? And the result was, again, about $6 million to support long-term recovery in the USVI and Virgin Islands. And they also were able to give 15 rapid response grants when tornadoes, impacted a major bottling facility in Kentucky, as one example, because these things are gonna keep happening. So Crucian really thought critically about, where am I gonna respond? What are the types of events I need to respond to? What is the product or resource I have to leverage to respond, and how can I show up for my community, not in the immediate aftermath, but 6 years later when these folks are still recovering and building homes, rebuilding homes, right? So I offer that to ask you this question. What does preparedness mean? Whoops. I'd love to hear your collective thoughts. Does anyone have any examples of what preparedness looks like? Yes.
Having evacuation plans and emergency resources pre-identified in place for when they're needed in that moment.
That's awesome. Do you have these set up at your organization?
We do have preparedness plans. We work with a lot of those people in helping them in preparing for disasters.
That's awesome. What does that look like? Sorry to put you on the spot, but I love this. Love these answers. That's great.
Yeah, like how we work with them.
Yeah.
So we're an environmental consulting firm, SWCA, and that can be anything from putting together a wildfire prevention plan for a community to a hazard mitigation plan. It's a lot of planning. Working with the communities to evaluate like where those weaknesses are and those blind spots so that they don't find them in the moment, as well as looking at what are your natural resources and where are the weaknesses there.
That's awesome.
We need to look at.
Thank you for sharing. Anyone else have any examples of what preparedness looks like? Yes. Running around. Get your steps in today, right?
Hi, my name's Hyde. I'm with Excel Energy. So one of the things we've been looking at a lot recently are where the high-risk wildfire points in the state are, and what are the different things you can put in place there. Like we're looking at piloting electric vehicle to community resilience centers. So basically there'd be a place within communities that would always have power no matter what the kind of state of the electric system is around that, and different kind of creative solutions around that, which is interesting as wildfires obviously hit Colorado more and more and more and more.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Krista. I'm in risk management at First Bank. So we touch a lot of different things. We look at tabletop exercises quite frequently and do exercises like wildfire response. We had employees who were in the Marshall Fire as well as just, the impacts to our community. But also looking at cyber exercises and things and having retrospectives with our teams and making sure that they engage the right stakeholders, that we build a playbook for those things after the fact.
That's great. Anyone else want to share what preparedness means for you?
Hi, I'm Shanda with Fourth Wave Strategies Consulting. One of the companies I worked with, we looked at matching both our internal and external preparedness and how those could sync up. So from a charitable giving perspective, disaster response, disaster recovery, the full cycle was one of our focus areas. So we budgeted money to be able to use year-round for preparedness activities and more resiliency efforts. And then we had a separate special fund that was if disasters occurred, so we could do emergency response. And that fund was sort of set aside as, we won't use this unless we need it, but if we get to the end of the year and there's still money in there, maybe we do more preparedness or resiliency. So we got buy-in from leadership that looking at both aspects was important. And the way we made that case is we talked about our own business continuity of, okay, what are all the things we do? We were in energy, right? So there's a lot of risk there and lots of preparation for disasters of various types. And so we had said, we do all of this for continuity. Why wouldn't we do the same things to support in the community? Why wouldn't we help them prepare and manage risk the same way we do? And it was a definite shift in their thinking. Historically, it had been all about emergency relief, and that's the only time they need us. So we did that kind of first. And then the next piece we looked at, we do all these things with our employees around safety at work. But what about our employees when they're at home and their own health and safety in their families and in their neighborhoods? And so we get built on our partnership with the Red Cross to train our internal people in our HSE department, health, safety, and environment, as well as volunteer staff, to train our employees on disaster preparedness at home. And it was the whole idea of take what you learn here and the skills you have at work and be that resource for your own family, because most people don't really think about that, and then be that resource in your neighborhood. And so we just kept layering on the partnership, kind of building on this safety culture as what we do as a business, but then tying in the social impact piece and then turning our employees into more of these ambassadors and like knowledge base with that. So it all tied together in the end.
That's great. If you don't mind me asking, how did you help your leadership kind of shift their mindset?
I think it was really talking about that risk management piece. So like everything we do as a company to prepare for risk, to have these plans, et cetera. And then we're investing all this money and employee time and partnerships in communities around education and health and public safety. So why wouldn't we help our communities and all those other organizations that we work with be prepared for a time of crisis? Like we don't, like our business is only as strong as the communities that we work in. Our employees live in these communities, so you talk about business continuity and risk. If all of our employees are in a community that can't survive a disaster, neither can our business. So that, like kind of flipping that switch in their heads of like, oh, that makes so much sense. Why didn't we think of that before? And then it also, changes in leadership in our safety team helped too. Like at first, when I first started, I went right to them and said, oh, I love that we have the safety department. Here's all these things we can do. And he was just like, huh, And so he left after a year. And so then, just we layered it on. It didn't all happen in the first year. And so over really like a 4.5-year period, we built out this robust piece where I think every employee could honestly talk about like, this is who we are as a company. When we talk about safety, it's not just in the oil field, that kind of thing.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Anyone else? What preparedness looks like? How many of you have documented plans? See a few hands. That's great. How many of you feel like you need a strategy? Yeah, okay. We're going to hand out a few worksheets for you all. I think the group is a little too large for us to break out. So this is just a worksheet for you to take home and maybe do on your own, do with your team, but help you to start thinking about what does disaster response look like for your company, right? Where are you going to respond? What are the events you're going to respond to? Who needs to be involved in making those decisions? What are the resources? So I'm gonna, let those kind of circulate, and you guys can take those home and work on it with your colleagues. But I think now might be a good time to pivot to any questions. I'll go back to you first. I got you, girl. Yeah, we've got time. We don't have to run. No one needs to run. Unless running's your thing.
Okay. So my question is there a standard response time that you all have set when it comes to disasters, both with the actual response itself, but also communicating internally and or externally as to what that response is and the justification for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll answer in two parts. So Global Giving has a disaster response team. It is their job to monitor events all over the globe and figure out how we want to respond. Because not only do we help companies and their employees, we have a portfolio of nonprofit partners. Like we exist to serve our nonprofit partners, right? That is our mission, and tapping into that community is really critical for us. So yes, we work with great folks like Jessica and Lauren, but our mission first and foremost is making sure that those nonprofit partners have the resources they need to thrive, right? So we have a disaster response team whose job it is to monitor, and we have what we call a break glass plan. So when events happen, we monitor and we evaluate, similar to the tools that you have, to think about how big is this event? And depending on the level of that event will then inform what that response looks like. Typically if it's a level 1, a war in Ukraine, COVID, a Hurricane Harvey, right? Some just really horrific things that happen instantly. We usually have a fund posted and are responding with internal and external messaging within 24 to 48 hours, and we're making our first disbursements within a week, typically. But it can really vary depending on the event. With respect to the companies we work with, and I'd love to hear Jessica's thoughts, we really recommend, and again, having these decision tools will enable that response time so that you don't have to wait forever, sooner rather than later, right? If you need to take a beat because the issue is complicated or it's not clear cut, take a beat, right? I think we heard that in the session earlier today from Mark about Quinn from Western Union. And just really making sure that you're thoughtful about it, right? And being authentic, because your employees, your consumers, they know when you're not being authentic. They know when you're popping a press release up instantly because it feels like this is what everyone's doing, so we better do it. People can read inauthenticity. So the more you can do to be authentic and consistent, the better positioned you're gonna be. And I think the other thing to think about, as we were talking about the different stages of disaster recovery, if you're focused, we work with companies who really focus on kind of that long-term rebuilding and recovery. So they don't need to put a press release out within 2 days of responding because their focus is not emergency response. Their focus is that long-term rebuilding, which is a big gap when it comes to disaster funding. So it really kind of depends on what is the priority for your company, right? Or your organization, and kind of thinking through where do we want to play? What are the resources we have? And then I would definitely recommend having those turnkey templates for employee communications and external communications ready to go so it can be a plug and play.
I think what's interesting is we are just one part of that response. So for us, we are already monitoring it. We all are just readily available all the time with Google and all the information. So we all know when some of these disasters are coming. I think it's a little bit more difficult when it comes to humanitarian or social. It's just not as clean as there's a hurricane coming and we're going to respond. So we will already get a scorecard ready for something like that. Then when the fund becomes available, we'll make sure that that's already been communicated to that region depending on the severity of it. The funding, which is nice, is we already pre-fund that with majority of our disaster relief partners. The funds are already in their hands, so they will distribute within the week of, But I do think it is taking a beat, because you like anything, you put out your recommendation and it still has to get approved by the other 4 people in the room or however many, right? And I think we've had, depending on the severity, you still will get some people in leadership who are like, no, we're doing this. Regardless of what your scorecard says, we want to give this much. And it's just being flexible in that moment and then leaving it to our comms heroes to kind of push out that messaging. And I do mean heroes in the comms world. Bless them.
Over there.
How are you guys measuring the impact of the resources that you're deploying to these different crises?
Is that for us or for them?
Either.
So that's a great question. So we typically, our orientation at Global Giving really leans into trust-based. So we vet all of our nonprofit partners. We have a really thorough and rigorous vetting process. It was actually our friends at Fidelity Charitable many years ago who said just because you can doesn't mean you should give to a nonprofit, right? And that really underpins a lot of the work that we do and think about vetting our partners. So we vet them. So we know who they are, we know what they do. We can verify that if they're in the US, they are obviously a 501c3, and if they're not, they are equivalent to, so that when these disasters strike, we give them that unrestricted money. Because who better knows how to use it than them? I certainly don't, living in Washington, D.C. I shouldn't prescribe what the community needs. So for our emergency response and rapid relief grants, it is all general operating. And a big part of our process is really having a consistent feedback loop and open dialogue with our partners to understand what are the needs and what's going on. We're in constant communication with them all over the globe. I mean, what's interesting is for the invasion in Ukraine, we actually posted a relief fund before the invasion because our nonprofit partners who are in constant contact with our disaster team said, hey, something's not looking good here. Like, we need to do something. And Russia hadn't invaded at the time. But having that constant communication enables our team to understand kind of what the needs are. We certainly track dollars. We certainly track kind of any other top level impact metrics when it comes to kind of those longer term structured grants once we move out of that emergency relief phase. But our orientation at Global Giving really is trust-based. So we aren't looking to have them count widgets or survivors or, roofs rebuilt, because that doesn't really, in our point of view, indicate the degree to which a community has really recovered, right? And so we kind of come at it from a different approach, but would welcome your thoughts.
Yeah. I think I would just add too, it has been a learning journey for our leaders. They are very quantitative, right, when they think about their impact and what that looks like, and we've had to adjust that to be more qualitative, because just because we responded to 12 disasters does not mean that we were successful in impact. I mean, first of all, we're trying to mitigate the disasters, right? We want to give to zero, right, at the end of the day, because everyone's just happy and healthy. So I think what we've done is taking Global Giving's recommendations, once we give the funding, reporting back, and I think it's that communication piece. They probably are so annoyed when Lauren and I send them an email because it's like, hey, FYI, this is, but I think then they're not coming to us. So it's not so much of, we have KPIs that we measure just for our team regardless. Disaster relief is now just table stakes. It used to be, how can we get employees engaged in all three of our funding pillars? Well, disaster relief is just different. So we've had to teach leaders on how to think about it and how to be successful in that space.
And tools, right? It was Kevin Martinez this morning that said, you all are forecasters, right? That is the exact same sentiment here. We know these things are gonna happen. Let's be ready for them, right? Let's make sure the communities have what they need and your employees have what they need to thrive. Last words?
No, I think you did.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much. Please join me in giving our speakers a round of applause. Thank you so much, both of you. What an amazing workshop. Thank you for all the expertise in the room, everyone.